Hello, this lecture is going to cover pages 443 to 464 in your textbook about aging boomers. Who are these people? We've talked a lot about them in this class, particularly as it relates to the economic future of our aging society and the impact that it's going to have in a lot of different ways. But there are a lot of facts and subjective associations that are attributed to this generation of people. There were 77 million people born between 1946 and 1964. And the early boomers that were born early on can be considered leading edge boomers. Those that were born more in the 50s and early 60s are considered the late boomers. Some would ascribe the characteristics of this generation as being very idealistic and positive, and others have described this generation as being selfish and negative. Selfish from the standpoint that we know the boomers have not done a good job saving for their retirement. In fact, just today I heard on the radio that on average, baby boomers have saved less than $40,000 for their retirement years. So we know that boomers have been voracious consumers in our economy, especially when they were growing up during a period of great prosperity and affluence in our country. After the war, the country was booming. And boomers grew up with this mindset that they wanted to achieve, and they wanted to achieve high levels of education and good careers and have a career path that they could climb the ladder. So boomers do have the highest attained level of education than any generation before them. They're also a very strong political force in our country. 80% of all state senators are boomers and 60% of all senators are boomers. And the boomers comprise 25% of the entire population. They also hold the largest percentage of net worth in U.S. households. Nearly 2/3 of the highest net worth households in the United States are from baby boomers. And now you may say, well, if they have all this net worth, but they haven't done a good job saving, how do we reconcile this? Well, one of the issues is that when you average out the savings of a baby boomer for their retirement, the average, the mean, is actually higher than the median. So if you remove that 1%, the highest net worth people, and you average out, or you take the median of everybody else that are left over, the median is less than $40,000 a year. The average is higher because when you account for that 1%, it sort of skews that average. So it's somewhat difficult to come to a conclusion about the financial readiness of baby boomers. Some would say they're very well off, they've had careers, they're rich, they're wealthy, and other economists say not so much. But the boomers grew up in a very affluent period of time in our country, as I've said, and they grew up with this mindset that they wanted more. They wanted to have the big house and the 2 cars and the nice vacations. And so they were voracious consumers in our economy, especially when they all began to reach those employment years. Baby boomers had to buy shoes, and they had to buy clothing, and they had to buy all the things that were necessary for them to begin a career. As I mentioned, buying homes and cars. And so our economy boomed in large part because of this generation. The 60s and 70s, when the boomers were hitting about their 20s and 30s, was a very active time of social upheaval. Women's rights, civil rights, war protests, and concerns over the environment began to emerge. And it was a time of a lot of upheaval. So boomers were very involved in those movements. So that's why many ascribe to this generation as being one of the greatest generations of our time, because it was really from their social activism mindset that many of these issues began to become a part of our common conversation and our national debates on these topics. So, but we have to also remember that the boomers are a very diverse population, diverse in the area of ethnicity, social class, and some of them had a tremendous amount of cumulative disadvantage, which means that they didn't have, some boomers didn't have the kinds of opportunities that other boomers did. So we mustn't ever characterize them all as being this homogenous group. There's still a great amount of diversity in the boomer population. And as they age, that diversity is only going to become more pronounced and significant. Moody and Sasser describe effects that influence the mindset of all generations. There are aging effects, which the boomers are now beginning to experience, that biological aspect of aging where their bodies and their cognitive abilities are being challenged. There's also period effects, which are things that happen in a period of time where large groups of people are exposed to the event, but it has a different impact based on age. So, for example, the internet came to be around the 1980s. So the boomers were the oldest boomers were in their 40s around that time. So because they didn't grow up with the internet, they could have a more difficult time adapting to that new way of doing business. Whereas the younger baby boomers, those that were born in the 60s, had an easier time adapting to the new technology. So there are period effects that happen and new things that come forward that happen to everybody but have a different effect on people. So that's what a period effect is. Then there's a cohort effect, which is events that affect certain groups of people in the same years. So, for example, the post-World War II, the veterans that came home after the war, they certainly experienced a cohort effect of how they were received in this country when they returned from the war. And those are effects that happen to just specific groups within a generation. I think about September 11th and how that has affected the next generation. And I think about just with my two children, my daughter was about 8 years old, and my son had just been born. So while that event happened, while they were, both during that time frame, it has and will affect them both in different ways. So I want you to understand the difference between an aging effect, a period effect, and a cohort effect. But all of those things conspire to influence the way that baby boomers think about their aging years. So one of the things that we are anticipating in terms of an impact of an aging baby boomer population is that our economy is going to change. And our economy will change because the spending that boomers did in their adult years will fall off, especially once they reach retirement, when they're no longer getting paychecks and now they're living on Social Security and retirement and pension. Their spending habits are likely to change pretty dramatically. So unless they are part of that 1% who can continue to spend the way that they did in their early adult years, we are expecting that our economy is going to experience a dramatic change and a shift in economic growth and stability. There's also going to be a lot of changes that will be taking place within the workplace. But we know that many boomers wish to work longer into their retirement. And this will create issues for the workplace. And having a multi-generational work environment will be something that's relatively new for our country, because in the generation before the boomers, it was pretty much set in stone that once you reached the age of 62 or 65, you were going to leave your employment. There really were very few adults at that time that worked beyond that age. Retirement was associated with disengaging from work. That's going to be different with the boomers, and that will have an effect on the workplace and how companies deal with and respond to the demand of the boomers to continue to be employed. And as we know from our previous units, it is now illegal to terminate employment based on age, whereas years ago that was somewhat acceptable to simply say it's time for you to retire and you need to leave your job. There is a reading number 47 in this chapter, that talks about what is referred to as the perfect economic storm. And it is really the combination of mountainous debt that our country is in, a deflating economy based on the changing spending habits of the boomers, and 77 million people entering their years of retirement. Those three things are considered to be the perfect storm, which, if not dealt with, could result in dramatic and severe negative impacts to our economy and the well-being of not only older adults, but in the entire population. But as all with Moody and Sasser, there are also other viewpoints about this, and that's reading number 50. And the author of reading number 50 talks about his optimistic vision of what the future of our economy looks like with these boomers. And he coins the frame catastropharians, meaning there are economists that are doing nothing but sitting around and projecting all of the negative things that are going to happen with the aging of the baby boomer population. But he believes that he sees a different vision. He sees that baby boomers, as they age, are going to have a different plan for their golden years than their parents did before them, and that they're going to continue to work, and they're going to continue to be productive and active taxpayers in our economy. They will continue to have significant purchasing power. And he also projects that there are going to be market segments that are actually going to grow and become more robust than ever because of the aging baby boomers. And those markets include financial services, healthcare, travel and hospitality, and retirement housing. That the boomers are going to actually inspire a whole new economy and market in these industries. So he sees growth, whereas other economists see decline and detriment to our economy. So nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure how this is all going to play out. But one thing is for sure, that the baby boomers are going to redefine what successful aging and optimal aging means. Baby boomers are not going to disappear into the fray of society as the generation did before them. So it is bound to be an exceedingly interesting time, a time of great, great opportunity. But as we talked about in the previous chapter with Social Security, if we don't begin to address some of the real financial burdens that are going to be realized in our country with this aging population, we could face some economic crisis. So I think having a healthy outlook of some optimism, but also a realistic outlook on if we don't make some modifications to our Social Security and Medicare system, that could mean big problems and big changes for our society. I have posted in your folder, in the week 15 folder, a video by a company called Masterpiece Living. It's not a long video, but I want you to take a look at it. And this is a company that has been developed to specifically address the aging process of boomers. And they see themselves as somewhat of a life coach product that cities and towns and retirement communities can work with Masterpiece Living, so that baby boomers can live their dream in retirement, whatever that might be. If a baby boomer wants to learn how to skydive, Masterpiece Living will facilitate that. If they want to write a book, they will help facilitate that process. So as I mentioned with the other industries, there are new industries emerging to help baby boomers age successfully. You've seen videos from the Dr. Jonathan Sullivan from Graysteel. His company is built around healthy aging for baby boomers. So there's a lot of optimism out there, but there needs to be also a lot of caution as well with this very significant number of people that are entering their retirement years. So think about the mindset of baby boomers and how that might affect the way that they are going to age into their golden years. So that's all I have for you on this topic. The next chapter is about the aging marketplace. And I'm not going to lecture on that. That is an interesting chapter in the book. It's actually the last chapter in the book. If you choose to read it, that's fine. I will not be including much information or really any information from that chapter in the final exam or the final learning assessment that you'll have. So thank you, and if you have any questions, you know where to reach me. Take care. Bye-bye.